Welcome to another episode of Beyond Limits. Beyond Limits is the program where we talk about everything that happens around the globe, from politics to technology to science to anything else that you may want us to talk about. We try to bring you a perspective, something that you may not have heard before. In our previous program, we talked about the education system and we've dived into the history, a few thousand years of history, where we learned how the education might have started, how people were expressing themselves, and how they were transferring the knowledge from one generation to the next generation. Then we talked about the system of expression. In some societies and some cultures, they were drawing some sort of pictures to convey their message. And then, of course, in the other parts of the world, they were actually trying to develop some sort of letters and the wording. With the advent of this writing system, the education spread it quite quickly. And, of course, then different civilizations picked it up in a different manner. Then, of course, we talked about how the religion affected the education. And then after that, we looked at the Greeks and the Romans and how they gave us certain principles that we are using even today, even in computer education and many other sorts of education. We are applying the same principles that were developed sometime around 300, 400 BC. We also looked at the other parts of the world like India and China, how the education system was being developed parallel to these things in those countries and how religion was affecting them as well. And most of this education system was actually developed under some sort of royal guidance. There were very few or very little private institutions available at that time. I had Humayun Hafiz Hyderani with me in the previous program, who was providing us all this information. Humayun has a deep educational background. He has been teaching in several private universities, and currently he is working with the Ministry of Enterprise and Advanced Education in Alberta government. Humayun, once again, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
And if you remember well, in the last program, we were talking about different education systems that had been developed in the old ages. And we were slowly moving towards the Middle Ages. And I think we were about at the Iranian system, that how, Greeks came into being and they took the top spot. And then slowly Romans kind of stole that spot from them, and how that all transformation happened. But at the same time, in the other part of the world, another superpower was being developed, that was Iran at that time. What was the Iranian, influence and how they helped develop the educational system in that part of the world?
The area which is currently known as the country of Iran at that time was the Persian Empire. And we have reached the timeline that we were discussing in the previous program. We are now into 2nd, 3rd century AD. And at that time, Romans were in power in many parts of the Middle East and the northern Egypt probably as well.
Yes.
And on the southern side of the Middle Eastern area, on the eastern edge, there is the Empire of Persia. The emperor at that time in 489 AD was Amir Khusro. He had established back in 367 AD, the Persian Empire had established the Academy of Gundishapur. In their language, they used to call it Danishgah Gundishapur.
Okay.
And Gundishapur probably was the name of the city, and Danishgah means an academy or a place where people learn, right? They get knowledge.
So kind of university.
Yeah. It was originally the intellectual center of the Sassanid Empire, and subsequently of the Muslim Empire as well, after they conquered Persia. And it offered training in several different areas, including medicine, philosophy, and theology and science as well. Under the emperorship of Khalifa Harun al-Rashid, he was very much interested in education, that whole family.
Before we go into the details of that, we would like to mention, we were talking about the influence of religion on education. I think Islam is one of the religions which has put the most emphasis on reading. I mean, the Holy Quran descended on the Holy Prophet ﷺ, and it started with the words, read in the name of Allah,
yes,
in the name of your God. So it is very interesting. Nowadays Muslims may not be very advanced, and they may not have, they may be out of their golden time, so-called. However, a lot of emphasis was put on the education system at the time of the Holy Prophet, and he always emphasized in providing the education to all men and women. He kind of made it a compulsory thing. Then, of course, other caliphs also emphasized on it, and they took it further.
Yeah, I believe if we look at history impartially, any religion in its beginning has been emphasizing on education for everyone. No religion in its true form has ever stopped the path of education or learning. And Islam, of course, one of the religions from God Almighty, in its purest form, it dictates or tells us, guides us to gain knowledge.
Because it completed the education, basically.
Yes.
All right. So Khalifa Harun al-Rashid, you were
we were
talking
about Khalifa Harun al-Rashid. In his time, he, based on the pattern of Academy of Wisdom in Gundishapur, he set up another center in Baghdad, which was the capital of the Muslim Empire at that time.
Yes.
And he initially started as a library. He basically increased it, brought the knowledge from all over the other areas of the Muslim Empire, as well as the other empires which were present in the vicinity, for example, from India and from China. Manuscripts and scrolls and books were brought into this library, and they were translated. So the work of many other scientists from other nations and other times were found in this great library in Baghdad, known as the House of Wisdom, the Darul Hikmah.
Darul Hikmah.
Yes.
Okay.
Some of the fields that people could study in Darul Hikmah or the House of Wisdom were, for example, they could study astrology, mathematics, agriculture, medicine, and philosophy. And work from all of these fields from other areas were brought in, and they were translated.
Okay.
So work, for example, the Greek, Indian, and Persian texts were brought in. From Greek, for example, the work of Pythagoras, Plato, and Aristotle was brought in, and it was translated, as well as Hippocrates, Euclid, and the work of Pluto was also brought in. From India, a work of Brahma Gupta was brought in. So all of these scholars
so they did not discriminate on the basis of the religion of those people or the source of the knowledge, but they took the knowledge as knowledge.
Yes.
And they brought it in, and they not only brought it in, but they actually translated it into their own language. So actually, ordinary people could understand it.
Yes.
So I think this is one of the key points, that for any educational system, unless you are able to understand it, it's kind of useless.
Yeah, definitely. And they made it possible for everyone.
And they made it possible. And I think that is probably the reason why Baghdad actually stayed a center of knowledge for many, many centuries.
For many centuries. It became a very big city, and at its peak, it had a population of over 1 million people, and one of the largest cities at that time in the world.
And so this is where education flourished. A formal educational system got developed.
Yeah.
And then what happened after that?
What we see is that it wasn't the only time when education was at its peak in that specific era.
Yes, we talked about the Greek system already.
So there usually is a time of expansion for every nation and every, if we can say, religion as well. And then there might be a dark period for some time, and there's always a renaissance in every kind of system. So we'll talk about that a little bit later.
Yes.
Yeah, but at this time, Baghdad was one of the major cities. Another major institute in the Muslim Empire was in the city of Timbuktu, in the current country of Mali in Western Africa.
Yes.
It was one of the biggest centers after Baghdad, and education and information on many fields was present in Timbuktu as well. Unfortunately, nowadays it's not in very good condition, but it was once a very, very great learning center.
And it's interesting that the writing we talked in the previous program, the main writing system also started in Africa.
In Africa, but that was in East Africa and Ethiopia.
And this is in West Africa. We'd love to talk more about these things. We have to take a short break. When we come back, we'll be talking more where this center of education shifted from Baghdad. As you said, there was a golden time, and of course the dark time comes. So where this education system, center of education shifted to, and then what happened after that. So stay with us. We'll be talking more and taking you into the modern history right after the break.